Well, as usual, we did this for Israel. Almost everything we do in the Middle East these days is done on behalf of Israel. And the fact is that what's happened here is that the ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza has broken down, and the Israelis have gone back on a rampage. They're, beginning to execute the genocide once again. And the Houthis have said that as soon as that happened, they'd go after shipping in the Red Sea that was aimed at Israel, and they would also fire ballistic missiles at Israel itself. And that's exactly what's happened.
What are they trying to do to prevent goods and supplies and commodities and oil making its way to Israel?
Yes, I think it's largely symbolic, to be honest, but the Houthis are deeply committed to stopping the genocide. I mean, what's really kind of amazing here is that if you look at all the different players in the international system, the two players who've gone to the greatest lengths to shut down the genocide in Gaza, which one would think is a good thing, are Hezbollah and the Houthis. And in contrast, the United States and its European allies are complicit in the genocide.
Well, no question about that. Isn't it odd? I mean, Donald Trump, with some justification, took credit for the ceasefire before he was even in the White House via his aide, Stephen Witkoff, and now he's trashing his own agreement.
It is odd. I'm actually somewhat surprised. I thought that when they pushed, Witkoff and Trump pushed through the ceasefire right before Trump was inaugurated, that they would see to it that you moved from the first phase into the second phase, and that they would prevent Israel from stymieing movement into the second phase. But in fact, they have not acted that way. And as you know, it's Israel that has caused the ceasefire to break down. It is not Hamas. And we have nevertheless backed Israel hook, line, and sinker. And in fact, Trump has said today that he fully supports the restarting of the genocide in Gaza.
Right before we came on, I was looking at Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper that you and I read regularly in English. The death toll in 48 hours in Gaza, 710. I mean, this is just catastrophic. At this rate, this will exceed the slaughter that they perpetrated starting on October 7th or October 8th, whenever they invaded. But Donald Trump is worse than Joe Biden in this respect, no? Because you add the domestic repression here, which you and I have talked about, and there seems to be a new incident every day. There's a medical researcher at Georgetown University, a resident alien, permanent resident alien, who tried to get back into the U.S. They wouldn't let him back in because they found on his phone criticisms of Trump. Now, by what authority did they get the phone? They don't have authority just to take his phone, but they took the phone and there it was, and so now they're not going to let him in. Wait a minute. Criticisms of Donald Trump. What about Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech? That's pretty clear.
Look, I think your basic point that overall Trump is worse than Biden is certainly true. If you look at the assault on civil liberties now taking place in the United States, it is really terrible, and it's Trump at work. Biden, for all his flaws, did not do much on this dimension. He was not good on this dimension. He sided against the protesters who were executing their right to protest Israeli policy in Gaza, but he was not doing anywhere near as much to suppress free speech and freedom of assembly as Trump is.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is just overt. The case of the young man from Columbia University, you know, the Constitution says you have to, if the government wants life, liberty, or property from you for whatever reason, the litigation must occur in the judicial district in which the government says you did whatever forms the basis for its claims against you. Well, that would be New York City. They shipped them to Louisiana. Why? Because the judges in Louisiana obviously have a more pro-government attitude about immigration. And then the trial judge in New York, before whom his habeas corpus petition was filed, said, well, I'm going to move you to New Jersey. Well, there's no connection to New Jersey here either. It's a little bit closer. It's a lot closer than Louisiana, but nobody seems to care about the process. Due process is very, very important. Those so-called gang members from Venezuela, not a single one of them had due process. The government didn't even have their names, much less any evidence against them. It just swooped them up, condemned them on the basis of collective guilt, which is antithetical to due process, and in defiance of a court order, shipped them to El Salvador, where they're in jail cells the size of a coffin.
It's shocking. And I mean, two further points on this. One is you just wonder where all of this leads, because this is just the beginning. Donald Trump is going to be in power for roughly another 4 years. And the problems associated with Israel, which is what are really driving this whole phenomenon, are not going to go away. Right. So the incentives for Trump to continue to act this way and maybe even double down are great. And then the second point I would make is, where is the resistance? It's quite remarkable how little resistance there is to what
You're
Trump.
Right. You're right. You and I lived through the Vietnam War era. The resistance was overwhelming. I'm beginning to think that it was not a principled resistance, that it was just based upon the existence of the draft.
Well, it was some of both. And you want to remember that there was evidence that once the draft went away, and the draft went away at the end of the war, the resistance died down significantly.
Right. Right.
That is not surprising. But the point I would make here, Judge, is that there is lots of resistance, or there has been lots of resistance in the United States to the genocide in Gaza. But what the Trump administration has done quite successfully at the behest of the lobby is shut down that resistance. That's what's going on here.
Why isn't, I don't know what the alliteration would be to comport with Genocide Joe, Genocide Donald. I don't know, but why isn't there that moniker being painted on him? I mean, here's a guy who calls himself, in his inaugural address, a man of peace. Here's a guy who's taken American foreign policy with respect to Ukraine and Russia and turned a battleship around 180 degrees. And at the same time, he's funding slaughter, abject slaughter of women and children and babies in the Middle East. I don't get it. I don't get it.
I'll give you the answer. It's very simple. 3 words: the Israel lobby.
Wow. Do you, let's just switch gears a little bit. Do you see any significance in the so-called agreement between Presidents Trump and Putin and belatedly Zelensky on this so-called ceasefire? We won't attack energy infrastructure, even though each of them has done so. Do you see, I'm being a little snarky, do you see any significance in that?
No, it's largely irrelevant. It's just subject matter that gives us something to talk about on shows like this. This doesn't matter. What matters is whether or not Trump and Putin can reach an agreement on the 3 key demands that the Russians have made to settle this conflict once and for all. The Russians have made it unequivocally clear there's going to be no meaningful ceasefire until there is agreement on their 3 demands, and until you have in place a meaningful peace agreement. And as far as I can tell, we're nowhere near a meaningful peace agreement. And what we're talking about is a ceasefire. And again, the Russians say no ceasefire of any consequence until you get a meaningful agreement.
Do you think that Putin said to, this is pure speculation, to Trump, turn off the spigot of aid and intel, and then we'll talk?
I don't know what they talked about. For me, the really key issue is not that question that you just raised. The key issue for me is what they said about the key Russian demands.
Right.
Again, to settle this war, the Americans, the Ukrainians, and the Europeans have to agree to what I think are the three key demands of the Russians. And if you don't accept those demands, it goes on and on and on.
They can't even agree on what they talked about because the Kremlin readout was different from the White House readout.